So I'm excited to kick off what I call the celebrity panel for C+J 2017. I've spoken with some of the panelists in person and kind of talked about some of the tools and some of the initiatives they might speak about, which are exciting and I think that are going to be helpful for the future of the current situation. I'm not sure what to call the current situation in news, technology, and journalism, but it's complicated would be one. So I personally invited Brooke from Snopes. She is the managing editor of Snopes, and I'm excited to bring someone on that deals with this on a daily basis and deals with fact checking, but also has to kind of moderate and kind of absorb some of the impact from pushback against stories that fact check and stories that kind of redefine or reframe what is true, what's false, what's misleading. So we have Bill Adair, who is at Duke University, and he's a professor of journalism and public policy, and he is the founder of PolitiFact. So I'm excited to have him on our panel today. Nick Adams from Berkeley, Institute of Data Science. So we have a nice round of data plus kind of practice-based journalists. And Cong from Google Research in New York will be kind of following up at the end of our presentation. So the way this format's going to work today is I'm going to talk just a little bit about using my moderator privilege to talk about kind of what I think are huge kind of issues that we need to solve as people that work in technology, data science, journalism, information science, and kind of maybe questions we need to look for in the future. And so a lot of these involve fact and trust and reputation and computational methods, but some of these are kind of bigger questions around collaboration, around how companies and journalists and kind of even researchers and academics is it possible for researchers and academics to work with tech companies in collaborations, while maintaining privilege, privacy for their users. So some of the things that I'm going to focus on really are staying away from what I would call, speed bumps. So there's been a lot of noise, there's been a lot of outrage, there's been a lot of, there's increasing distrust, I think, of technology or using technological solutions to solve problems in news. And I wanted to move past this and kind of set this panel in a more positive frame and kind of, so I want to use this time that we have together, I think, which is valuable and limited, to kind of look forward instead of looking back and kind of move this conversation a little bit towards looking at solutions and thinking about solutions rather than kind of going back to examples over time that have happened that, where things haven't worked out or things haven't kind of worked as planned. So I'd be particularly interested through our later conversations if people thought about things like how can we make data and how can we build tools that are accessible to the public. I know the Knight lab at Northwestern has some amazing tools, and I can say that as a researcher myself, without these open tools and without these tools that are available at low cost or almost no cost, Netlytic would be one. I mean, these tools are essential to, I think, being able to understand without having a $5,000 a month budget to have something like Crimson Hexagon. And plus, when you're working with the raw data, I think, as we all know, it's a lot more informative, and the data cleaning process is really part of the discovery on a lot of these issues. So also, thinking about tools and systems and strategies that are resistant to manipulation. I mean, we can build open tools, but if someone can come in and fork it and essentially build that tool for nefarious purposes or use the tools that we're trying to use to fact check for the exact opposite and use it to target and use it to kind of manipulate systems, this is bad. So accessibility is huge in my opinion, and transparency and resilience. So, and also keeping tools that journalists are able to use without having to have a huge background in technologies or having a full data science background. So things that dashboards that journalists can log into and make sense of Twitter data, pull Twitter data without having to understand how to build API apps. So positive kind of framework in here. I'm kind of try to censor actually issues that use specific examples, just given the sensitivity of what we're going to talk about. And so 4 areas that I am going to try to steer or shape this panel is looking at what about metrics? Like how do we think about facts and metrics, and especially how do we think about facts when we have metrics that are, for the most part, in my opinion, and this is debatable, but I would say that most of the facts and stories and content are shared around what I would say are emotional vectors. So, the like, the reactions, these are all defined platform by platform, and I find them to be increasingly problematic when we're trying to get in and build systems to fact check and for reputation and for credibility. Because although these aren't necessarily endorsers of credibility, so 1,000 or 1,000,000 likes is not an endorsement of legitimacy or credibility of content, but it is a strong endorser of attention. So, and I think that I'll use one bad example. I'll break from my earlier. But so when we flag content, especially as debated or as something that is disputed, I think that works in the same way that these other tools or these other sharing mechanisms, reactions, emoji reactions, likes, it works kind of in the same way. It's an indicator of attention and kind of things that trend. So these are exactly the systems that are being manipulated, in my opinion, to kind of take advantage of platforms and people's time and attention, and also kind of to harness their outrage. So one of the other huge questions I have in this is, we can think about content, but what's the relationship between data and code to facts? So I think that these are questions. I'm not trying to provide answers, but I think it's good to think about. An example that's very, very recent is I found some Facebook data. Found is a good way to put it. I discovered kind of a glitch in one of the APIs, and I was able to extract content from some of the pages that had been taken down. So this is a huge scandal at the moment, and it unfolded mostly yesterday. So I'm still kind of reeling from it. But when I posted the raw data onto data.world, which I find is an incredibly useful platform. So data.world is I think of it kind of as a GitHub for information science and journalism. So I posted that on data.world, and there is actually kind of a discussion thread that's not unlike Wikipedia, a background discussion thread. Someone came in and actually accused me of posting or trying to set a predetermined narrative. And it was outrageous to me. So I was like, I'm giving you data that was previously hidden, to help you understand the facts. A data set, an Excel sheet, all the metrics directly from the platform. Nothing. I didn't change any of it, and I just don't know how someone or how people can. This was probably a member of what I would think of as a member of the public. How could someone accuse, when you're trying to provide the raw data, how can you get accused of a predetermined narrative? I mean, sure, a newspaper can use it to establish a narrative, like the New York Times did the next day with the kind of harnessing rage story. So is code? How do these things relate to facts? If we provide people code, if we uncover source code, if we uncover the actual scripts, say the Python scripts that are used to semantically mine data to micro-target people, are these facts? So I think these are big questions. The third one is really thinking about how we can collaborate and how we can set up new collaborations between tech companies and maybe nonprofit organizations, and also researchers and academics, because I think this is a huge need. People are screaming for data. They're begging for data from platforms like Facebook, from Pinterest. Pinterest doesn't even really have an API to get data, and often LinkedIn as well, right? So often you have to scrape or do things that would be beyond the kind of reach of most ethics boards or most approval processes. So when we're forced to scrape LinkedIn data, when we're forced to scrape Pinterest data, and really beyond their terms of service, to understand things. I mean, these are problems. And this also, I think, in my opinion, has turned into something that has led to the dependence and arguably over-dependence on Twitter for research. Twitter's very, easy to get data from, and so what we're seeing now as a result is an over-representation of data coming from out of platforms that are more accessible. So this again, since Twitter has been used and harnessed to strategically manipulate, this is a problem, because now it's not even used for that purpose, but now it's being overrepresented in research and data. So when we make claims about things, we have to have data from other sources, and especially sources that have 2 billion users. So the other thing is, I think that Bill is going to show something, an app, a skill maybe that he's built. So what happens when our signals, our visual cues go away? Things are moving towards transparent interfaces. Things are moving towards invisible user interfaces like Alexa and voice interfaces. So we have a lot of signals and reputational signals to go off of for visual content, and especially for text. But what happens when those go away? What happens when we're asking questions to devices that need to return an answer? And this is a problem that I see as going to compound all the other problems that we've had based on trying to find answers to facts, reputation, to assigning scores on credibility and trust. But what happens when it goes basically invisible? So these are, and also the Internet of Things is another, what happens when we're getting our news from our toaster, right? And these are quickly becoming reality. So those are kind of my 4 pivot points for this conversation. We have some, this is the celebrity panel, so we're going to have some time for, after they do their presentations and talk a little bit about their own work, we're going to move towards a little bit of audience Q&A. I've been fairly adamant about censoring questions that aren't questions in the audience Q&A and are more when people stand up and go on a 5-minute kind of statement about something. So I'd love it if we could use this time to ask questions and think about things rather than make kind of opinionated statements about other work or contest things. So the other problem that I see, the last thing that I'll talk about is the open web, right? And just like the transparency in interfaces and the move away from the signals that we've traditionally used, text, visual cues, Google, for, the search results, also the open web, right? I think that the open web is a huge part of this and open systems. So as things move more into apps that aren't available through the open web, Snapchat would be a fairly good example. I know it's not completely closed off, but how do we fact check apps like Snapchat or House Party? Because the House Party is unbelievable in terms of engagement. So we need to, this is kind of a panel that I thought maybe could help set up some of these questions, and I'm excited to kick it off. Thank you.
Okay, I was waiting for a prompt. Can everybody hear me okay? I can't hear myself. Okay, excellent. My name is Brooke Binkowski. I'm the managing editor of fact-checking website Snopes. If you're not familiar with us, we basically track down rumors and we try to track where they come from and we debunk them. We have expanded slightly into news, but only when it's disinformation that we see forming. We have decided to make disinformation and misinformation and propaganda our beat in this time, because 2017 seems to be the year of disinformation and misinformation. Well, 2016 as well. And I'll give you a little bit of background about myself first, because I feel like, there I am. I suppose I don't need to project as much as I was. I went right into TA mode. It just sticks with you. If any of you are in grad school, you'll remember that for life. All right. So I have been a reporter for a very long time. I started very young, when I was 18, and I'm 40 now. Which is a weird thing to say, because I'm like, oh my God, I've been a journalist for as long as I think my age is. So I've been a journalist for 22 years, which is the age I'm convinced I am. And I was a street and crime reporter for a long time. I did breaking news, I did a lot of investigative work, and then about a decade ago I started covering the border. And then I went full independent, and I worked for places as varied as CNN and the Globe and Mail, and I just did a lot of stuff. But my true love was the border and the sort of misinformation that came out of it and how it applied to humanitarian concerns. So that kind of uniquely positioned me to be a fact checker across the board, because I was doing, I had experience doing general reporting and investigative work already, and then I was confronted in Mexico and around Mexico, the topic of Mexico, how disinformation can shape the way entire populations can see a region, right? So, if you hear anything about the border, especially away from Southern California where I live, you think it's just this sort of lawless Wild West filled with, people riding horses and shooting guns into the air with packets of cocaine thrown over the border wall and all this stuff. And really what it is a place, first of all, there's already a wall there. So let's just get that right out of the way right now. There's already a wall, and there's places along the border fence and the border wall. There's breaks because the terrain is so rugged, but there's places people can go and talk to each other. You can, sort of touch pinky tips through the barbed wire and the chicken wire. And yet you hear so much misinformation about it that you might as well just think that you're
taking your life into your own hands to even go up to the border wall. So it was stuff like that that made me want to start pursuing misinformation to begin with. And then the kind of thing that you see the populists subjected to within Mexico, especially North Mexico. Well, I shouldn't say especially North Mexico. Northern Mexico was the only place I was covering, mostly Baja. So the point of all of this is there's a lot of malleability in the way facts are presented around the border to begin with. And I also got used to dealing with death threats, which was good because now I work for Snopes and I get them every single day. And it sort of gave me a thick enough skin that I could deal with it. If I hadn't had the particular experience that I had with work, with work experience, with dealing with all kinds of people, with swimming upstream and trying to get at stories that I needed to debunk, and most of all, dealing with what it's like when people actually want you dead. I don't know if I would be able to handle this year at this job. But here I am, and now I am, as I said, the managing editor. And sometimes I write. I do a lot of research. I assign stories, of course, and I do stuff like this. And it has gone from being a job that I was really excited about, which I still am, to being sort of this reason to be, right? I don't know how to pronounce it in French. It's sort of because I've so absorbed it into my personality that I just cannot separate it from my job anymore. So I've become even more one of those people like, actually, that's wrong. We debunked that 6 months ago. We debunked that. But I think it's important. I mean, it is incredibly important to deal with disinformation in particular because, and let me say what I mean by that. Disinformation is truth with lies mixed into it with the specific stated, or not stated, the specific purpose to mislead. Misinformation implies that you don't really know what you're aware of. Propaganda is, just purely political purposes, and propaganda can be disinformation. It can also be misinformation, I guess. But all of these things are intertwined and related, and all of them have a damaging effect on a nation's psyche if left unchecked. And this leads us to a lot of other problems, which I see mostly as a major, major threat to democracy as a concept. Because if you can't agree on basic facts, then you have no democracy, and it creates a vacuum for autocrats to step in. And you see that across the world, and I would prefer to not let it happen here in the United States. I'm a little bit attached to this country. I'm sort of rambling, so is there anything specifically?
I have one question. So you describe your personality type as quote unquote fact checker. So I mean, does this mean that?
Well, journalist.
What would we be better off if that was kind of popular? If it was popular to be a fact checker or a fact checking geek? Because geek has been brought into the parlance of kind of what's hip and fashionable. But what about fact checker?
We ruin parties. We are like the worst people to have around. So no, I wouldn't wish this on anybody. We are seriously the worst. Actually, well, we're fun to party with, together. I would imagine. I mean, we all went to my boss's wedding and we had a great time. But I did notice that we sat at our own table and nobody else sat with us. So I think we're pretty much insufferable. But the journalist personality is kind of like that too. No offense to any journalists in the place. I mean, I'm one of them. Like we get like a dog with a bone, right? It's like, you don't tell me what to do. You don't tell me how to think. How dare you? And then it kind of goes from there. And it makes for, if you can't direct that sort of energy into fact-checking or journalism overall, then you just become an impossible person to be around, I think. So no, but that's why we exist, That's why journalists exist. That's why fact-checkers exist. I see it as a public service. I think that it should be treated as such. And we do that so that other people can have the time in their life to do other things.
I have one more. So for Snopes, as a business or as a resource, what have you seen from the growth in the past, say, year and a half? I mean, what has been the response in terms of the audience or the growth?
So I have a very skewed view of the audience response because I generally, as the most sort of public-facing person, I've deliberately gone out of my way to be the person out there because other people who work for Snopes don't want to do it because it involves not just positive attention. In fact, mostly not positive attention. So my idea of what people think of us is skewed. I think of us as, we're small, obviously. There's 14 of us. overall, and we are kind of like just working all the time. And so the things that filter through are basically, you know, you suck, George Soros, we hate you, you need to die, I'm gonna come find you, I'll paint the walls with your blood. That was my favorite one. Yeah, I was like, come on, you know, come at me, I'd like to see you try. Which is probably not an appropriate response either, but it's the only one that I have, so I'm just like, I'll take us both down, come on. And so I think that, you know, when I'm out and, yeah, so I have Snopes, I don't have them with me, but I have a box of Snopes t-shirts at home, and all the neighbors wear them now. They like come over and they're like, oh, is that, oops, I love Snopes. I'm like, really? Yeah, do you have any more of those? Sure, I'll give you my t-shirts. Here, have some t-shirts. And so like all these old hippies in my neighborhood are wearing these Snopes t-shirts, and they say that all they get from people on the street is like positive. You know, so people go, oh my God, I love Snopes. You know somebody there? That's amazing. Whereas I'm terrified of wearing a Snopes shirt because I'm worried that somebody's gonna come out from behind a tree or something like that. Oh, I guess the point of the, I'm sorry, let me put this all together. The point of all this is we went from being relatively obscure and, you know, on a personal level, I went from being a completely unknown reporter by design to sort of being front and center in this new discussion of fake news. And it's all heady and overwhelming and very exciting and also exhausting. Oh my God, that celebrity panel. I know, oh, by the way, so I saw that email when you said, oh, it's the celebrity panel, I'm excited to be moderating it, and I thought, well, that's kind of rude because I'm on a panel at the same time. And then I got palpitations and had to sit down for a minute. I don't know.
Well, I think that maybe it goes by the number of threats that you get, and I think, yeah, I don't know. Maybe, you can count your misinformation and fact-checking reputation by the number of, you know, negative response.
All right. Well, thanks, Jonathan, and thanks everybody for having me for this. So we're here sort of to present a sequel. This is a paper that we presented 2 years ago at the C+J at Columbia, and I should just acknowledge my co-authors, Chen-Kai Lee back there, and Jun Yang, a colleague from Duke, and Cong, who was on the panel. So 2 years ago at the conference, you may recall, we presented a paper about the Holy Grail. We said the Holy Grail was fully automated live fact-checking, the dream that you're watching a debate and during the debate the fact checks pop up on the screen. And this is the Holy Grail because it's all about closing the gap in political fact-checking. Right now, whether it's PolitiFact or Snopes or the Washington Post, we have to wait for you, the user, to go and get the fact check, to look it up, to do the research. And we know that's imperfect. We know that it can take long. We know that the fact checks, even when we've published an appropriate fact check before, it's going to take you a while to follow it. So the goal is closing that gap. So I'm here today to tell you that we are a lot closer to reaching the Holy Grail than we were 2 years ago, and I'm very excited about some of the progress we've made. So I guess I always like to start by just sort of framing it by saying it's time. It's time we should be doing this. Brooke talked about the problem of misinformation all around the world, but it's also, we're at a moment when advances in AI make things possible. And something else happened in the last 2 years that I sort of got drawn into and began working with Cong and folks at Google and Schema on, and it's a project called Share the Facts. So I'm going to start by telling you about that because it's sort of the foundation for what I think can be the future of how we automate fact-checking. So the progress so far, for some reason the logos are not showing up there. Imagine a Google logo on the right and I forget what the other logo is, but Share the Facts is a project at Duke, a partnership that we did with Google and with schema.org to basically bring structure to fact-checking. If you think of the different ways that fact-checkers publish, Snopes publishes as traditional articles, the Washington Post publishes as kind of blog posts, PolitiFact publishes in a structured way. None of them use the same CMS. None of them use a common structure. And so we realized, and this was really Justin Coslin at Google, realized that if we could structure the content and highlight it for search engines, that we could really help anyone, Bing, Google, Facebook, find fact-checking in better ways. So let me show you how we did that. So our goal, we came up with the idea of a widget, I'm going to show you in a second, and the widget basically requires the fact checker to identify pieces of content in this structured, consistent way. And that can be found by search engines, it can be found by Facebook. It can also, because it's a visual card in a fact check, it can be shared on Twitter and Facebook. So, man, what? For some reason, all these images have fallen out of this PowerPoint. So imagine that was a, I'm sorry, I should have looked at it ahead of time. If you look at the end of fact checks that are published today by the Washington Post, FactCheck.org, PolitiFact, they have a visual card, and it has a picture of the person. It has the statement that has been fact-checked. It has the logo of the organization doing the fact-checking, and it has a rating. So this is the secret sauce. This is the structure that summarizes the fact-check for a reader. So at the end of an article, a reader sees this, and they can share that on Twitter and Facebook. But under the hood is the schema in the HTML that says, this is the person who was fact-checked, this is the statement, this is the rating. And so that, when you put it together in a database, becomes a really powerful thing. So Cong is going to show how this is used in search results by Google in really powerful ways, that when these things show up, that they Google now highlights fact checks in several ways, and that's because of what we did with Share the Facts. So that's sort of the foundation, the building block of what we're now doing. This is another thing that we did that was manual. So we realized that we're not going to get immediately to the dream, to the Holy Grail of fully automated, hear the claim, find the fact check, pop up the fact check on a screen. So we wanted to start by doing it manually. So, and this is based on the habit that politicians have, because we know that politicians repeat their lines. They have talking points, they repeat them, even when the fact checkers have found them to be false. So that means that fact-checking content is different than other kinds of journalism in that it has great archival value. And if you can pop it up to a user at the right moment, it has great value. So you're watching a debate, a presidential candidate says something that's been fact-checked before. If the fact-checkers can pop up a fact-check right then that's relevant, that has great value. So that's what we did with this browser extension. We did this in Chrome. It was built by one of my students at Duke, Gotham Hathi, who's now working for Google. And it is a very simple tool that used Twitter to just push out fact checks at the right moment. We used a live stream from NBC. It helped that the live stream was delayed by about 15 seconds. That gave the PolitiFact editor time to find the fact check in the archive, put the URL into the tweet, send the tweet, and it popped up at really, amazingly, just the right time. I saw it at the third debate and was just blown away at the potential of this. This is live fact-checking. Now, it's not perfect. We did it in the State of the Union speech, did the same thing. The problem was, for whatever reason, the live stream we got from NBC was much more delayed. So the fact check would go out and show up before Trump actually made the statement. So that was sort of a problem. But you know, that's the value of fact checkers, that we can anticipate what he's going to say. But this is something we're going to be working on as part of a new project that is our effort to achieve the Holy Grail, a project we call the Duke Tech and Check Cooperative. We just got funding from the Knight Foundation, from Craig Newmark and Facebook. and we're just getting started now. So, a big part of the Tech and Check Cooperative is ClaimBuster. ClaimBuster is a product you may recall from 2 years ago that Cheng Kai and Nafi talked about. Or actually, Cheng Kai, you were not here 2 years ago. Nafi gave that presentation at Columbia. That's right, okay. So ClaimBuster is an amazing tool that helps human fact checkers find factual claims. So it used machine learning to identify what is a factual claim that fact checkers might want to check, and it has the ability to go through massive amounts of transcripts and identify for the fact checkers, hey, here's a claim you might want to check. So some of our students and Cheng Kai are working to take ClaimBuster and push it out to the fact checkers. So our goal is that every day we will automatically review transcripts from television programs, from the congressional record, and then send an email to the fact checkers that says, hey, here are some things said in the last 24 hours that you may want to fact check. That's a huge help to the journalists because they don't have time or even enough interns to do that. So we're very excited. And if you look at Cheng Kai's website, you can see some of the other things that he's worked on, including a cool. This is what it looks like in the interface. If you paste text in, it presents a score for each sentence using the algorithm that Cheng Kai has developed. So very cool and of great use to journalists. So our goal in the Tech and Check Cooperative is to push it out to the fact checkers every day. So, the other aspect of what we're going to do in the Tech and Check Co-op is bring everybody together. We want to get together with the technologists and the journalists who are doing work in this area and bring them together both virtually once a month or so for video conferences, and then once a year at Duke to have conferences like this where we can talk about our progress, swap ideas, make sure that we're using common standards. I talked about ClaimBuster deployment. So the other piece of the Tech and Check project is really more on the lines of the Holy Grail, what we call the Popup Family, the Popup Family of products. So we want to develop a mobile app. This will be the first thing we develop that is essentially a manual version of that Chrome extension. So it will be a second screen experience. You'll have your app running while you're watching a live event, and the fact checkers will have the opportunity to push fact checks onto that screen live and with links to their related fact checks. Another project called Truth Goggles. Many of you know Dan Schultz, an amazing technologist who works for the Internet Archive, is going to build out Truth Goggles, which is a web annotation, what Dan calls a credibility layer. And we're excited to see that. He started that while he was at the MIT Media Lab. We're also hoping to build Apple TV, Chromecast, Fire TV apps so that we can do this live. So we can take a live stream and put fact checks on top of live events. Now, one key to that is the licensing issues. So we're hoping to work with some of the networks and try to overcome some of these issues of just getting a consistent live stream and also throttling it so that we don't have the issue of fact checks appearing before the statement is made. And then finally, the dream, the Holy Grail of, whoops, this is a mock-up of the manual app. So the idea is you'd be holding this up while you're watching the live event. The fact checks would pop up on the screen. I talked about the Apple TV and Chromecast app. And then finally, just to sum up, to show you what this might look like. So the idea is that you would hold this up to a live event. It would be converting the voice to text. It would be submitting each sentence to our Share the Facts database. When it finds a match of something that's been fact-checked, it would trigger that in your screen, and the truthometer would pop up. Again, this was 2 years ago when we presented this paper. We thought this day was a lot farther off. We're a lot closer, both in, not just in years, but in technology and ability. So we're very excited to be working on this, and afterward, be happy to answer questions. Oh, I know, one last thing. Just in our spare time, we built an Alexa app using Share the Facts. Alexa, ask the fact checkers.
Welcome to Share the Facts. We consolidate fact checks from some of the most respected journalists in the U.S. Ask me to check a claim you're wondering about.
Did Donald Trump oppose the war in Iraq?
Washington Post rated it 4 Pinocchios when Donald Trump said that I opposed the Iraq war.
Alexa, ask the fact checkers, are there long gas lines in Korea?
PolitiFact rated it half true when Donald Trump said that long gas lines forming in North Korea.
So we're very excited about this. We did this almost sort of on a whim, like we had this database, what could we do with it? We built it pretty quickly for the Echo, and in doing so, I think we really showed the promise of this and how the database is the key, and that we can get instant fact checking to people. So we're very excited about that. Great.
Okay, let's see if my mic is on. I think it is. I'm Nick Adams. Let me see if I can get my slides here. It's in Chrome. I might need assistance here. Okay, great. Okay. Yes, hello. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me, and great to be on the celebrity panel. That's the place to be. I'm a research scientist at the Berkeley Institute for Data Science, so you can find me at UC Berkeley. I also run the Goodley Labs there. I'm a sociologist by training. I got my PhD in sociology at Berkeley, and actually came into looking at news articles very closely because I was doing work looking at all the Occupy movements across the United States and all the actions and events that occurred on those Occupy campaigns across 184 different cities and towns in the US, and started building tools to really go into depth looking at the content of news articles. Turns out we have a lot of reason to look deeply into the content of news articles, and that's why a lot of us are here today. And I want to talk about how, as a community, we can construct notions of credibility, how we can do that together. So first, I want to give you an image of the future, or a possible future. Let's say you opened your Google News feed, and right out to the left, or if you want, it could be to the right, of each article, you've got something like this visualization that's giving you a sense of the credibility of the article. Maybe there's even a score in the center, and these different colors give you a sense of credibility across some broad metrics for the article itself. So not just checking the facts within the article, but getting a sense of a whole article. That's an image of a possible future. I want to give you an image from the past, about 120 years ago. I wonder who here knows what these guys are up to. I'll tell you what they're up to. They are pulling out railroad spikes, and they're moving the rail 3 inches to the left, and then they're pounding the railroad spikes back in. And they're doing that because early on in the development of the railroads in this country, there were several different companies that all decided, we're going to build railroads across this whole dang country, and we're going to do it the way we want to do it. And some of them like to have 5 feet gauge between the rails, and some of them like to have 4 feet, 8 inches, or something like that. And so at some point, when it was clear that we could connect all of these if only we worked together, there was what they called the gauge wars, and there was some fighting and eventually some cooperation, and we changed the gauge of our rails. I'm here today to talk on behalf of a couple things, but particularly on a group called what I think is going to be called the Credibility Community Group. Aviv might know. It was called the Credibility Indicators Working Group, but it's a group of people in this space trying to solve the problem of creating credibility metrics for news articles, sponsored by Hacks Hackers, me, Dan, and the Knight Foundation, and we're all coming together to make sure that 5 or 10 years from now, no one's ripping out spikes and moving rail 3 inches. So this is what we're doing. Our vision is to foster a healthy co-opetition. So a cooperative, multiple different people in this group, multiple different teams have different visions for how we're going to get those credibility scores for the articles. But we all want to make sure that we can treat our different approaches as hypotheses of the best way to do something. And we can test those hypotheses because we're going to do all of our work and we're going to test against a common set of articles. Common set of 1,000 articles. We're going to have one data model for the indicators of credibility, so that if I have an indicator of credibility about, say, someone is ignoring selection effects when they're writing this particular sentence, my team can hand it off to another team, and they can use that credibility indicator in their system, which is going to create one of these credibility scores. And then the other thing that we're trying to do is make sure that we have a very large set of credibility indicators, and that's a common set. So we don't have slightly different measurements for the same concept. These are all the things that we're doing to ensure that later on down the road, we're going to be able to interoperate and share the best that each team develops. You can join us. We meet every Thursday at 10 a.m. There's a video chat. Just talk to me, and I'll make sure you're pulled into the group. We meet at 10 a.m. Pacific. That's noon Chicago time on Thursdays. This problem of misinformation and disinformation in the media is a multifaceted problem. Sometimes it's disinformation, sometimes it's simple mistakes, sometimes it's facts or claims of fact that are wrong. And there are many teams with different approaches, but we're all trying to establish the credibility of articles. We can imagine some of these teams, so there's like FactMata and News Tracker, which are some of these new teams that are doing more automated approaches. Certainly, Bill's group, if we can pull you in, you'll be up there on the automated side of it. And then there's some more human-powered approaches, even to the point where you have folks kind of making sure that newsrooms have some tools before they publish. And then you have tools like the Public Editor Project that Aditya will talk about yesterday, or he'll talk about it tomorrow. There was a mistake. Don't report that. Where you have a whole community of people on the internet doing some kind of process checking or fact checking. So what I want to talk about is, I kind of want to go off of Bill's talk, and yes, Bill, you are working towards a very important Holy Grail. There might be more than one Holy Grail. I wonder if people recognize the one in the middle here. It's just a little chuckle back to Monty Python. So for some of us, the Holy Grail is to have something like this, a credibility score for each article. And articles contain more than facts. They have formally structured arguments. You could have a true fact plus one as a premise, another premise that's a true fact, and then they lead to some erroneous conclusion because someone has done their logic or their inference incorrectly. We have persuasion. Is that 45 minutes or seconds? 45 minutes. All right. Okay, let me slow down. Oh, there's Q&A. Okay, it's not all for me. Okay. We have people trying to do persuasion, and whether they're going too far with maybe the psychological biases they're introducing in their persuasion or not, these are things we can look into. There's illusion to contextual knowledge. There's the illusion of contextual knowledge. It's not even in the text because everyone already knows. And then, of course, there's misinformation and disinformation. So there's a lot in articles besides just facts to check, even though that is an incredibly important piece of the puzzle. To quote a little bit from Bill's paper, and I really appreciate this, it's really hard to get into the content of news articles and see all the different ways that there might be mistakes. So a factual claim, Bill says, Bill and team et al., don't forget these guys, can span multiple sentences. It's crucial to capture the claim's important elements, such as the numbers, the time points, the intervals, comparisons, groupings, and aggregates, the topic of the claim, the template of the fact being expressed, the involved entities, the relationships. It's very complex, is the point. And basically what we're doing right now is there's automated approaches that are trying to write the rules that say, oh, when you come across these words, here's the regex, or when you come across the byline, or you come across incoming links or outgoing links do this, and that can be used as a way to understand the credibility of the author or the article or the news source. Look at past fact checks. That's kind of the automated rule writing approach. There's an initial attempt with humans. I understand that there's a very large corporation that we all admire that has hired a crowd of 10,000 people, and it has them look at news sites and asking 5 basic questions with a Likert scale, asking about the credibility of the news site. So these are 2 kind of ways to try at least to establish the credibility of a full article. The problem here is a problem of traction. Like, how do we get actual traction to do this work? And I think the automated approaches and the early human approaches are still kind of stuck in the mud. So we want to help them out. So there are 2 ways to get more traction. One is to get more tread on your tires, right? And then the other is to remove some water from the mud. And so to get more tread on our tires, we need to really define what are the specific mistakes that humans are making, or how are all the different ways that we're fooling ourselves or fooling each other? What are the psychological biases? What are the inferential mistakes that we keep making? The other is to remove water from the mud. So if we imagine that the dirt, the not watery part, is like the signal of what we're really looking for. And then all the rest of the text in the article is the water that's making it muddy. We really need the noise. We need to remove some of that water. We need to focus these very specific identifications of mistakes on the particular words and phrases that commit the mistake. So saying on a full article, oh, someone ignored selection effects, or they posed a false dilemma, somewhere in this 600 words is not very helpful, especially when we start to think about moving this into a machine teaching framework. So what happens when we go into the content? What mistakes can we see that humans make? How are we fooling ourselves? And are all the ways we're fooling ourselves so simple that we can just simply write rules for them? Probably not. Are they so random that we have no idea and we can't catalog them at all? That doesn't seem to be the case either. So our team, a team at Berkeley, the public editor team, has just kind of used the hypothesis annotator to kind of look through some news and see that actually, yeah, we can identify what the mistakes are, and there's maybe there's 100 different types of mistake, and that covers 95% of cases. Not bad, And really, we've kind of been doing this for centuries. I'm a scientist, and I take that identity on, and I take it pretty seriously. For centuries, we've been figuring out all the ways that humans fool ourselves, and science is the methodical, painstaking, slowest possible process to ensure that we're not fooling ourselves. And we've amassed a whole set of methods and approaches, whether it's the physical sciences or formal logic. Lately, everyone's getting into the work of Kahneman and Tversky, and we're understanding all these ways that we're predictably irrational, that we make mistakes. And even journalism has professionalized to the point where we have some good ideas about how we're fooling ourselves. The next question is, can we actually apply this to news articles? Can we apply it to text? Can we apply it to the content? And this is how we get into the content. So, like I said, I got into data science at all because I was looking through thousands of news articles and trying to apply very specific labels to those articles. It had to do with the Occupy movement. But one of the tools that I developed at the Berkeley Institute for Data Science, and with the support of folks there, makes it possible to take the work of applying very specific labels and break it out into an assembly line. It's like 1 minute left. Yeah. So you can break the work out into an assembly line. So you might have a person out there on the internet, a crowd worker, a citizen scientist, and their job is to read through the article and just answer some basic questions. Another person might have the job of reading through the article and finding particular passages that look like they might be fishy, like they might commit some argumentative fallacy or inferential mistake. And then you have another crowd worker, another contributor, whose job it is to really hone in on a particular set of problems, like, oh, someone's confusing a correlation and causation here, or they're posing a false dilemma. And that person has become trained in those things to look for the specific evidence, like in correlation and causation, like, oh, well, there's time order, and there's correlation, but we don't have a plausible mechanism, so we're not sure that this is actually correct. Because there's more than facts in articles, because you can have a true fact and a true fact posed as a false dilemma, we need this sort of process checking to make sure that the thinking process that goes into articles is as good as it possibly can be. Using a tool like this, together with hundreds or thousands of people who are doing this in the morning instead of crossword or Sudoku, that's going to get us the traction we need. That's going to get us the traction we need for the Holy Grail we want. Thank you.
Should be on. Okay. Oh, no. Okay. Oh, this is a interface I've never seen before. Project. Okay. Oh, cool. That worked. All right. Thanks, Larry and Rich, for inviting me here. Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks for negotiating with Google Comms PR people so I can be here. Basically, my name is Cong Yu. I've been a research scientist at Google Research New York for about 7 years. And I started working on computational journalism with Jun and Chen Kai over there about 4 or 5 years ago, and really started working with Bill as well once. And I think you joined Duke at 2013. That's when we started working together on fact-checking. As Bill was mentioning, and one thing I emphasize the date over there is like Google started working on the fact-checking project way before fake news into the headline, into the front page of newspapers. And basically, I still remember on that day, and Justin, who has been working with Bill on the Share the Fact widget, and emailed me, saying, hey, can we swap notes on fact-checking? I said, oh, why not? Like, both of us have been working with Bill and are passionate about this project, and both were concerned about misinformation, even though it wasn't as big a deal as it is now, and its possible impact on democracy. But at the same time, both of us have like lots of full-time projects working on, but thanks to Google's 20% time, so we started working on it. It's really nice. And Richard Gingras, the VP of News, and Karina, the head of research in New York, were very supportive of our efforts. And since that time, we had 3 major launches. And as you can see, I'll show you some screenshots over there. And it is now a full-time effort as part of our Google's overall fight against digital misinformation. So why is Google surfacing fact-checking? And the one key thing at Google we realized is like Google come to Google to seek high quality, trustworthy, and authoritative information, and they do trust Google. And promoting fact-checking content is strongly aligned with the goal of promoting quality in search. So it's an essential part of us. And in fact, this event is partly sponsored by Google News Lab, and trust and verification is one key pillar of the News Lab mission, and fact-checking sits right there. All right. So let me quickly talk a little bit about who qualifies as fact-checkers. And we mostly leave the standard to the community, fact-checking community. And there's a code of principle by the International Fact-Checking Network. And I think 2 things interesting to highlight here. One is the absolute transparency. You need to be very transparent about the source and the methodology and the funding. Source and methodology about the article, and then the funding the organization is getting as well. And the commitment to very open and honest corrections. And it rarely happens, but it does happen from time to time. And I think a lot of the good fact checkers do try to do a very good job of being open about that particular aspect. So from a Google perspective, and what we want is we want the fact checkers to be correctly and consistently implementing the claim review markup. By the way, Bill in his slide mentioned this is a Google schema. No, this is an open schema. It's the schema.org open schema. Everybody can use it. And in news, we also have this general guideline for the publishers to follow, and there's a link over there. And in search, we have some additional developers guide so that Google can be looking at the content and determining algorithmically what is the authoritative source of information. So I'm happy to say there are now more than 50 fact checkers around the world who's using this claim review schema, and their content is surfacing at Google. So let me walk you through a little bit about what has launched at Google. And the first launch, which is about a year ago, is actually a FactCheck label in Google News. What it does is inside a news story, if the fact checker has published some story, fact-checking something, some statement related to this story, that fact-checking article is going to be promoted in the story and show up to the user, and with a very notable tag over here. So basically it tells you, hey, this is a fact-checking article. And we do that across all the news surfaces, including top stories and news mode search and so on and so forth. And the second launch, basically in April of this year, is in the core search. And this, in my view, this is a very important launch because this is where we are reaching out to the entirety of Google audience in search. And we enrich the snippets of the fact-checking result and to bring you directly what the claim is and who made that claim and what's the verdict of that fact check. And so this actually brought fact check to a much, much broader audience. And so traditionally the audience to the fact checking organizations are usually bi-coastal people and lots of them are already converted into thinking, hey, you need to do fact checking on things. And this launch actually exposed the fact check to many people for the first time, and we see very interesting user feedbacks from the data we collect. And more recently, about 3 months ago, we launched this so-called FactCheck Gadget. This is a proactive way, if you go to Google News on the desktop, and we will basically highlight today's fact-checking for you and basically show you all the interesting fact-checkings are algorithmically ranked and give that to you so you can take a look. And we are inside Google, we are doing a lot more things, and then there are a lot of ideas floating around as well, and some are more even like more aggressive, and some are more conservative, but internally we're definitely looking at this very carefully, and we want to go forward. So some of the challenges, and this is a very high-level simplified view of the ecosystem in journalism, and you have publishers, users, and platforms, and advertisers. And the platform sits in the place where we are connecting the users and the publishers, right? I don't speak for other companies, but for Google, users, they do tend to trust information they found on Google. But at the same time, it's important to understand, like Google cannot be the arbiter of truth. That's why we work with the publishers. We work with other people in order to bring credible information to our users. But what's important? I think it's very important for us to promote high-quality information that can build trust. And fact-checking is just one piece of the puzzle. And there are opposing views. For example, you need to go out of your filter bubble and look at a problem from a topic from different perspectives, and in-depth reading, and people are spending okay. Very little time actually reading an article, and they just read the headline and just go away. So how do we promote and how do we incentivize people to spend more time and reading an article from top to bottom and really spend some time deeply thinking about it? And also publisher transparency. So let me, I want to promote a little bit AI because Google is the AI company right now, but what we want to do is we want to use technologies to help journalists do their job more efficiently and more timely. And Google is making progress towards the quality, as I was mentioning. I'll skip that. And another thing, I just want to give a shout out to the open collaboration that we are having. And for example, with Sally from Santa Clara University, the Trust Project, and related to the credibility working group as well. And basically, we're trying to define certain structured data so that's around the journalist piece so that you can understand and what to trust, what not to trust. I also have some personal thoughts, and basically, I think in this, with all the recent developments, I think there's much bigger and increased responsibility of the fact checkers, and there's several things I want to talk about, and perhaps on the panel discuss as well. Like, first of all, is one false article from a fact checker or reputable source is doing a lot more damage than 100 fake news articles that you can see out there. So the fact checkers, like, you really have to do a good job to build that reputation, to extend that reputation, make that last. And now, and second thing is because the Google launches is bringing the fact checker to a much broader audience than the audience you're seeing before. So, and we see that very clearly from the feedbacks we are getting, and that brings two things. One is like, in fact, all the stories are potentially worth fact-checking. I know, like 2 years ago, if you look at the Pizzagate story, we say, who would believe that, right? So no one's going to write any fact-check on that. But turns out, and there's lots of misinformation of there. Some of them may sound ridiculous, but nothing is too ridiculous to fact-check. Another one is we have to be very careful in terms of providing very emotional verdicts. And I think I disagree with Bill a little bit on this, and I know I absolutely believe like a pants on fire for Pinocchio are important information because they are the true verdict for this. But imagine someone from the other end of the political spectrum and looking at this, they may feel, wow, okay, I don't want to read the rest. Right? So there's debate going on, like exactly how do we handle this kind of situation. And finally, like we should keep each other, the fact-check organization and the fact-checker publishers should keep each other honest. And I think we need to bring in a more diverse set of fact-checkers, and as long as they are converging on the same principle of fact-checking. Yeah, so that's it. All right, cool. Leave it there?
Okay, so I'm just going to ask, as a moderator, I'm just going to open this with a few questions. I'll turn it over to the audience in a second. Can you hear me? Yeah. So, okay, so one of the things, just being someone who's in the middle between kind of journalism, I guess, and some of the research and some of the more advanced computational things that I've noticed. What happens when, so we can build systems, we can build tools to fact check, we can kind of recruit people to join fact checking organizations and get involved. What happens when alternative or counter tools or systems are built? So, what happens when the other side starts building fact checking tools to dispute the fact? What happens when the fact checking schemas start disputing the other fact checkers?
I have thoughts. I have opinions on this. So that's inevitable. I mean, that's going to happen. It's already happening. You see a lot of the more dubious websites. I try to say dubious because all my other adjectives are much less nice. But these dubious sites are doing, some of them are doing their own fact checks. And you just see fact check and you think that it's legitimate. And so I want to make a few points that I make whenever I speak as much as I can, which are related to this. One is this is not unprecedented. We have seen influxes of fake news, and if you trace it in history, this is an article, a long-term article I've been working on for months, unfortunately. But what I've found is every time a new form of mass communication is adopted, fake news, misinformation, and propaganda springs up immediately afterwards. So we saw it with newspapers, radio, television, and I don't know, I'm sure there's many other things that we can, I mean, you have a game called telephone, for God's sake. I mean, that should say everything you need to say. Telephone is when you change one word and you go down a line of people. Do you guys know what I'm talking about when I talk about the game of telephone? Yeah. So, I mean, it just goes to show you that with mass communication comes misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, and so on and so forth. And it always gets harnessed by people who want to maleducate or misinform. And this is an important thing to understand because that goes to show you that it has been done and it has also been beaten down before. And it's something that news organizations and the general public as well needs to be very mindful of because it's simultaneously depressing and also kind of, it's something that I see as inspiring in a way because we can get past this. And usually it plays, unfortunately, on fear of the other, racial fears in particular. I don't know if that's just a function of fake news in general or if it's reflecting the certain, the cracks that are present in American society and, a lot of post-colonial societies, right? But it does seem to sort of have this theme of racial fears. And so it's also kind of depressing that it doesn't change, right? But what saves, and keeping in mind that my perspective is naturally skewed by my own experience, what does seem to happen is that journalism ends up becoming stronger and filling this sort of informational void over time. What has happened here in the situation that we're in right now is not only have we adopted a new form of mass communication, which is to say the internet, which is still relatively in its infancy. I know pretty much everybody here probably spends all day in front of a computer, myself included. It's part of our lifestyle now, and it's become so seamlessly part of our lifestyle, we forget that even 10 years ago, not everybody was on Facebook. Nobody was on Facebook. It was like a bunch of weirdos, you know, like 2007. Everybody was on MySpace, right? But not everybody was on MySpace. Young people were on MySpace. It was, you know, this sort of phenomenon that's been going on is still new. It's still less than a generation old. So that plus the sort of degradation of journalism in the United States after the 2007 recession, which was already threatened journalism, but no more so than after the crash of 2007, when everybody started using the financial crisis as an excuse to clean out newsrooms. So journalism is very expensive, especially investigative journalism. It's difficult, it takes time. It's not obviously commercially viable. And so it's very easy. And journalists will work for very cheap, unfortunately, because we don't know what else we will do. You know, I tried to, you know, I've seen people try to go into real estate. I've seen people try to go into public relations. Some people can do it, but most journalists, once they're committed, it just ruins you for everything else, except fact checking. But it's.
I think we're going to run.
Oh, are we running out of time? Okay, I'm sorry. It's happened before. It'll happen again. We need stronger journalism, and we need to work. Humans need to work in concert with technology, and that's the only way it's going to happen. It's going to take time. It's going to be difficult. And it's going to be expensive, but it's worth it. Okay, done.
I can't disagree. How can you disagree? But to your question, Jonathan, about, you know, you have multiple different fact-checking sites, and they might be in contestation. We really have to get down to, okay, well, what is the backing? What is the fundamental backing of their fact-checking? What's the ground truth? And, you know, if each different if each different fact-checking organization has a different process, or some of them have black box processes that are automated, then you're just going to have a loop of conflict and contestation. It turns out humans, and I'm kind of putting on my sociology hat and my science hat here, every time, if you're looking at the reputation of anyone or the legitimacy of any particular claim, that's always accomplished as a social process. We know if someone's reputation is sound because other people say so. We know if something actually works and is a useful piece of knowledge in the world because we have processes for testing whether that piece of knowledge is useful in the world. And that process has really been developed by science over the last several centuries. So I think, you know, Aditya will talk about this more tomorrow when he's talking about public editor. A good solution is to get many people in a totally transparent way, so there's no black box, many people in a transparent way applying the rigor of science to the sorts of claims and the arguments and the persuasion that are coming across in the media and in journalism. And then we can say, look, this particular phrase has this particular problem with it that science has learned to recognize over the centuries, and therefore we can think that this sentence might be false, and because this sentence is important to the article's thesis, we can say that the whole article might be not credible. But yeah, you have to ground it in something, and we're suggesting ground it in science and then make it transparent so everyone can see exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, cite your sources, show your work. I mean, that's really the only way to retain or gather integrity.
So yeah, I think in my view, I think totally agree with what you said, both of you. And at the same time, I think the diversity in terms of political ideology diversity, I think right now the bigger problem is we don't have enough diversity in terms of that in the fact-checking community.
It's not the only diversity
Okay,
we're
I will
lacking in the
address
fact-checking.
Yes. But
Feels like
speaking of the political ones, and totally agree, and we should do better in that. And at the same time, like looking at all the feedbacks we are getting from the users, because to broaden the audience that we have, and I think having multiple organizations fact check the same claim is actually very useful. And people can say, hey, this seems to be the consensus. Especially if we actually bring the political diversity and into the mix, then the trust eventually And we want to build trust with the audience, with the users. So it's not just whether this is true, whether that is true. It's ultimate trust that matters. And this actually strengthens the trust if you have diversity in the fact-checking process. And so I think we need more of those, at least at this moment. Maybe there will be a time where certain publisher will start doing lots of things that are shaky in a lot of aspects, but that's why we have those principle code of conduct.
So let me explain what Cong and I have had this discussion for years. And I think it gets to two things. A definition, what is fact-checking, and a question of objectivity. So the question is, can fact-checking be done by partisans? And I think partisans use fact-checking techniques, but I resist the idea that partisan organizations are fact-checkers. And part of this is, I guess, maybe, I'm sort of one of the people in the early days who started a fact-checking site, and I just believe in my soul that fact-checking needs to be objective. That the very nature of determining what's accurate or not is best when it's done by objective journalists. And so, for that reason, I'm just not persuaded yet that partisans can do this and be honest brokers. I feel like they're going to bring their partisan agenda to it, and so I'm skeptical. Can it be done? Yeah, I think it's possible, and I'm not ruling it out. But I have yet to see a sustained effort by a partisan organization. Like what Media Matters does, to Media Matters' credit, they don't call it fact-checking. I've looked on their website. I don't think anywhere that they call themselves fact-checkers. And what do? They find statements by people on Fox and Republicans that are false. And they really only check one side of the spectrum. So anyway, that's just sort of a difference in perspective. But to me, fact-checking needs to be done by objective journalists.
But define objective. It's difficult when it's difficult to get a grasp on objectivity when it's. I'm informed despite what I thought of myself. I'm informed every day that I'm a liberal scum and every other epithet, right? I've never thought of myself as anything but anti-authoritarian. Basically, is how when people ask me my politics, I go, I hate authority, pretty much like across the board, And so I've never really thought of myself in that way, but now I've been told over and over and over again by people who are partisan, of course, that I'm, well, actually, I've been told both sides. I've been told I'm liberal. I've been told I'm conservative. I'm told I'm a Soros bot, a Koch brothers bot. But it's like, how do you define objectivity, right?
Well, I think it has to start with what we teach our students in intro courses, that you need to go out and talk to people on all sides, and you need to do thorough reporting, and you need to do reporting that reflects different points of view, and then reach an independent conclusion. Now, could someone, we all have our own personal feelings, and I do, but I just think for the credibility of fact-checking, it is best if it comes from an objective approach rather than I am a liberal organization and I am going to use these techniques to find falsehoods by whatever. But again, in many ways, this is just a definitional thing. That's how I define fact-checking. Cong defines it different.
I think it's time to turn it over for I have two people. I'll start with, I'll walk the mic up here.
We have people who walk the mic. So, and Jeff and I will take care of that. And but you want to call the person, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So on the right, up on the fourth row.
My question is about the presentation of the content of fact-checking, and I think Brooke can tell us more about it. Because you made a mention that, fact-checkers and journalists are party poopers, like we're annoying. So how do we compete as fact-checkers, as purveyors of truth, against clickbait and virality? Do we fight with other virality I mean, it's very hard to start a compelling lead with the word actually, blah, blah, blah.
I mean, you can't really fight marketing with marketing. I mean, I guess you can, but if you want to do it in a way that's responsible, and really when you look at the clickbait and things like that, you're looking at a sort of marketing perspective. They're trying to make something, they're trying to harness your emotions and use them to make money off of you, right? We can't really compete with that model on that turf because who would want to? I'm not in the business of making people upset just so they'll click on a story. But I think that what you do, and it's so daunting when I say it out loud, but the only thing you can do is just speak your truth, speak the truth again and again and again and again and again and again, and just keep saying it over and over. Just keep saying what is true. That's the only thing that we can do. And eventually, it does work. It's just it took us a long time to get where we are right now. It's going to take us a long time to get out of it. It's just persistence. You have to be persistent, and you have to be resilient, and you have to know your truth. And always cite your sources. You can't really drag people in with truth when they're running on emotion, though. But if you have everything, if you have all of your information, we try to think of ourselves as sort of like a live encyclopedia in a way, so people later can go back and go, oh, okay, here's where that originated, here's that. And we try to present everything with context. So again, it doesn't bring in people initially, but it does help people once they are already there.
All right, hi, Miriam Wood, Northwestern University. According to Pew, the people who identify as mostly conservative or somewhat conservative have extremely low trust for, say, the New York Times, which a lot of us considered, or I used to consider, the paper of record. So I'm kind of wondering if people at PolitiFact or Snopes have some sense of how much trust people who are conservative have in their organization, and what we can do about that.
So that's a great question, and I've thought a lot about that. We did a study at Duke in early part of this year where we looked at reactions to fact-checking by publications on the left and right. And publications on the left love fact-checking, say great things about it, cite it favorably, or at least cite it neutrally. Publications on the right, much more likely to be critical of it, to use demeaning adjectives about it, to put it in quotes, fact-checking, because it's not a legitimate thing. So there's a serious problem. PolitiFact got a grant from Knight to go around the country and hold some town halls, meet with people, work with local media, and see if they can get to the root of this and figure out what might be done. Getting to Cong's point about calling things four Pinocchios, pants on fire, I think it's worth looking at different ways that we can present our fact-checking content that may not be quite so confrontational, but is still appealing to readers, and I think that might help in gaining more of a conservative audience. One way being done by a Dallas TV station that's now being used by other stations in the Tegna chain. It's called Verify. That includes something of a come along with us as we figure out whether this is true or not. So I'm hopeful things like that might work. I think presenting it in different ways might work. I also think we need to get out of the office and go talk to people, because fact checkers, tend to work in areas where there are a lot of liberals. And so I think it's really important to hear that feedback.
The fifth or in the middle.
Hey there, Justin Myers, Associated Press. So actually, Bill's point segues pretty cleanly into my question here, because I'm just thinking about Brooke's point sort of toward the beginning about the importance of agreeing on basic facts in the first place, and then sort of as Cong and others have alluded to, there is really this sort of confrontational aspect to modern fact checking, right? Somebody said this thing, it is or isn't true. And I'm wondering sort of what opportunities you all see for surfacing sort of these core nuggets of information at times when people might be more receptive rather than sort of in the moment of something, especially that's said by somebody that they're attached to, like the president.
So I think you all at the Associated Press have done a much better job of putting that in news stories. And I think that's one place it is being done and can be done. So when a politician says a statement that's false, don't just, and this is the way, when I used to cover Congress and the White House, it'd be like, they'd say something false and you'd just report it and, you'd be like, people will figure it out. And that's why I created PolitiFact, because I felt guilty after a career of doing that. But what the AP and the New York Times and others have been doing lately is, the statement, the politician said whatever, comma, a statement that is not true. Did Barack Obama create ISIS? No. And there was a story out of North Carolina where the AP reporter said, quoted Trump saying that and then said a statement that has no basis in fact. And so I think that's one way, even before you get into automation, that we can, tamp these things down early on. We were talking about this last night at the reception, that the longer a false claim can grow, it's almost like it grows roots, and gets more rooted, and then it gets repeated, and so.
And I would suggest too that we actually need to be engaging readers at earlier in the process and in a different way. So it's not handing them a fact check, or even just handing them a fact. They should be able to read through the news and maybe see one of those credibility badges at the top of the article, but also see labels in the article that say like, oh, here's someone injecting a confirmation bias as they're writing, or here's the posing of a false dilemma. And then what you do over time is you have an audience that's much more literate to the ways that we persuade and we lean too heavily into our persuasion, or we misinform. And then you have an audience that's looking as they're reading, and they're noticing that this is all over the place. Even when you're, not as much in straight news, but especially in op-eds and in feature pieces, there's a lot of opinion that's being interjected. There's a lot of sleight of hand, and that's the way we write. And sometimes it's to make a compelling narrative. But if people can see that, and they can see it every day as they're reading, and they can be involved in the process of identifying it, you're going to have a readership that's much more engaged and willing to look at these things as they're happening.
One thing that I'm seeing here that I've seen this trend for several years, and I've had issues with it, is the atomization of journalism and news in general. Fact-checking should always be a part of news. I mean, that just it should go without saying. But it has been so spun off and sort of separated from what has become known as news, which is a lot of, there's a lot of news, but then there's a lot of opinion pieces or, slanted news pieces that don't, reveal that they're slanted. I saw this happen with data journalism as well after 2008, where it was sort of treated as this separate animal, but actually it should have been folded into journalism from day one, into overall journalism. And I think that by focusing on facts and context and nuance in the context, not to repeat myself, of every news story and every fact check, that will go a very long way. But again, take a long time, expensive, difficult. It's difficult to do, but it's necessary.
Hi everyone, my name is Mihai. I work with Phil Menser, who is also focusing on misinformation and fact-checking. He'll be speaking tomorrow. But I think something that's really important to me is citizen science, and I know that Kevin Adams mentioned that a little bit. And I know that there's strength in numbers, and I'm not quite sure of the tools that we have today that hold up to this right now. For instance, like what's happening in Catalonia and Spain, I'm sure there could be some politicians that are experts in the field or some enthusiasts. Yet there's no way to gather this information, to my knowledge. So I'm just curious. If there was a way to engage the whole world in this effort, is there any tool for it or anybody that's working on it right now? I didn't hear you.
I said, oh, I said it's the internet, and it's kind of caused some problems.
Well, I mean, the internet has democratized publishing and created, like, in some ways, an amazing thing that if someone has a great story, they can get it out to 1 million or 1 billion people. It has not democratized editing and review of articles to make sure that we're being careful. But the internet is the place where you can run a tool like Text Thresher that allows thousands of people, millions of people, everybody in the world if they wanted to be looking through all the top shared articles of the day and putting layer upon layer of these labels that are figuring out like where people are making mistakes, passing some of the work to fact checkers who have to go do some external research, but a lot of the work is right there in the article. And if you can, and then you stitch that back together, you have a credibility score, you have these labels on articles, you have increased media literacy for the whole population in a way that engages them.
That reminds me of that great Onion headline, "Mistake found on internet."
Yeah, someone was wrong on the internet.
Someone's wrong on the internet, that's the way I live my life.
Sorry, I had a follow-up to that, actually. Maybe I didn't make myself clear, but I meant to say citizen science for crowdsourcing. Or so citizen science for fact-checking. So, like, how is there a way to involve the whole community? Because I'm sure there's people that may not care. There's people that may not know about it.
What do you do? What's your bulwark against, say, mob rule? How do you keep from people ganging up on somebody they just might not like the look of? How do you protect against false stories or claims that somebody came up to them and was trying to abduct their kid or something like that? I mean, you have to have different people in different roles, and I think that without some type of order, crowdsourcing will just sort of collapse in on itself, unfortunately, because of. And I'm obviously cynical because of what I've seen.
But the people who architect crowdsourcing systems are aware of all these problems.
Yeah, okay, good point.
Yeah, without
But how do you
commenting
trust
on
that?
whether it works or not, I know there's several efforts in the APAC region, in Indonesia and Thailand, and they are using crowdsourcing mechanism to do especially scientific and health-related fact-checking.
So thank you to our panel.